Welcome back to Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Ben Givarz. This is a show about how creatives use technology to tell their stories, and my guest today is mix engineer Ryan Ulyate. With over 4 decades as an engineer and producer, Ryan Ulyate began working with the late, great Tom Petty of the legendary Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers in the early 2000s on Petty's Highway Companion solo album. Ryan would go on to create the Dolby Atmos mix of Tom Petty's Wildflowers for the Deluxe Edition titled Wildflowers and All The Rest in 2020, drawing on 20 years of mixing in surround and 5.1 formats. From there, he went on to mix Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers' greatest hits in one of the great live albums, Tom Petty Live at the Fillmore 1997. Ryan's own solo album, Act 3, was nominated for a Grammy in 2023 for Best Immersive Audio Album, which of course he mixed in Dolby Atmos. In this chat, he shares how he sifts through hours of multi-track tapes to put together stems for his stellar Dolby Atmos mixes, his theories and best practices for mixing music in Atmos, and how he approached creating his first solo record with an immersive experience in Dolby Atmos in mind from the start. So let's jump into it with Ryan Ulyate. Hello, Ryan. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
You have done some amazing mixes, which I'm looking forward to getting into shortly. But, since you are sat in your space now, could you share with us a little bit about how you outfitted the space, taking it from mixing surround and 5.1, which you've been doing for many years, to enabling for mixing Dolby Atmos?
Yeah, I can. First thing you do is you buy more speakers. I had these really nice ATC speakers, and I bought some more of them because Dolby recommended that everything on the lower level be the same kind of speaker. And I already had 5, so I got 2 more. We had a lot of help from ATC, and Zach Winterfield at Trans Audio helped us put some height speakers in, which are ATC SCM12. I think they are. And he really helped us with outfitting this room. This room is just a 12 by 24 shed that was behind the house when we bought this house 20 years ago. And I looked at it and said, I know I can do something with that. And we turned it into kind of a mixed room. And I've been mixing here since 2006. We converted it to Atmos in 2020. Of course, Dolby was really helpful. Brian Pennington came in and tuned the room and made it officially. I don't know if you can see behind me, I have a Dolby Atmos thing. It's official, but it's all very funky and very homegrown, and it's a really comfortable spot.
Nice. And it's a beautiful spot as well. So take us back to even further beyond the Dolby Atmos days, before the Dolby Atmos days, and even before the Concert for George days. Talk to us about, kind of coming up in the industry and some of your early projects that inspired you to start to want to get into surround mixing and eventually Atmos.
Well, I was really lucky enough. Around 1997, a friend of mine introduced me to Jeff Lynne. And he said Jeff Lynne was looking for an engineer. And I was like, well, wow, that's cool. So I went and met with Jeff in his house. And at that time, George Harrison was a friend of his. They were working on an album. And I got to meet George, and we got to work on this album called Brainwashed, which was the last album that George did. He actually died before it was over. So we finished it with Danny Harrison, his son. And that was just a really amazing thing to work on music like that. And it was such an important artist, and it was just such an important album. And after that, there was a memorial concert for George called the Concert for George that they did at the Royal Albert Hall in 2003, a year after George died. And that was something that I got involved in recording and mixing, and along with Jeff. And it was an amazing show. I mean, Ringo was on it, and Paul McCartney was on it, and Eric Clapton was on it, and Billy Preston, just a ton of people. And when it came time to mix that, we had to do a 5.1 mix. And that's the first time I ever attempted a 5.1 mix. And we went to Village Recorder, and it's a kind of a fun story. I asked Jeff Greenberg, who was managing the Village Recorder at the time, said, do you know anybody who has done a lot of 5/1 mixes who I might be able to hire for a day to show me how to do this. And he goes, I know a guy. And it turns out he's an engineer named John Kurlander. And so John shows up, and I said, this is a George Harrison thing. He goes, yeah, I know. I'm the guy that punched in the guitar solo on something. So I inadvertently, I found John, who'd gone on from them. He started at Abbey Road. He went on to be the chief engineer of Abbey Road. And now he's doing music and post-production. He's doing film scores, basically, I think, these days. And so he showed me the ropes. And it was just so fun to have all those speakers. And he said one thing that I thought was really interesting. I said, well, what do you do with that center channel? Because, there's 5 speakers, and what do you put in that? And he said, put stuff in it. Put all sorts of stuff in it. You got an extra speaker. Don't be afraid of it. Just put stuff in it. I'm like, okay. So we did that project, and that was my first 5/1 project. And I think it got some kind of award, some kind of surround sound award. It was a wonderful project, and it really got me it just got me indoctrinated in this whole immersive audio thing with music.
Yeah. And so fast forward to 2020, and you're starting to think about enabling for Atmos in your own studio. And the first record that you do is one of Tom's great albums, right? Wildflowers, and the deluxe version of which was called Wildflowers and All The Rest. You're obviously working from assets that are played with such incredible skill and feel and groove and captured so well. And it's amazing source material that you're working with, but these are, stacks of tapes of multi-tracks and demos that you need to go through and prepare as stems to mix in Atmos. So take us through a bit of that process and what it's like to sort of be a detective and go through all of these archives.
It is exactly that. A lot of times these tapes aren't marked that clearly as to what they are. They've got some titles on them. And when you're looking for extra material, it's just so fun just to go through all these things. We went through 268 or so reels of 2-inch 24-track tapes for the Wildflowers project. They spent a year working on that album. And the whole idea behind that album at the time was really the distillation of those songs to their just most simple and pure form. And it wasn't about it being overly adorned. They were really, Rick Rubin and Tom Petty and Mike Campbell, who put that album together, really wanted to distill it down to its essence. And in the Atmos mix, there's one song in particular called Don't Fade on Me, which is a very simple song. It's just got Mike Campbell and Tom Petty playing acoustic guitars, Tom singing a very plaintive vocal. And what I realized about Atmos was that it's not something you have to do to overwhelm people. It's just something you need to do, and it's something that allows you to put you in the space of where the music was being made. So just to have those 2 acoustic guitars with a little bit of ambience and Tom's vocal, very pristine, but have it feel like it's around you. At some point, there's a guitar solo that happens, and I wasn't using much of the height speakers. And I realized that if I put the guitar solo, it was a solo they overdubbed, in the height speakers, all of a sudden it was like the clouds part, and this magical thing happens. So I realized that really with Atmos, you can create more drama and get people really inside the music and create these little moments. And I think that I've always looked at music visually. I just always see a picture when I'm mixing. And this just broadens the scope so much more. And it gives you such an emotional connection when it works. And that's all that the musicians that I've respected and I've worked with ever wanted, was just to find a great way, the best way for people to connect with their music. And it was a real revelation for me, realizing that you could make something happen even with something really simple with this format.
That's beautiful, man. Another track on that album that has a little more going on in it, but I think also you really treated the height channels really well, or the instruments in the height channels, is It's Good to Be King. And when I heard that in an automobile, for example, for the first time, and was a little bit closer to the overheads, it sounded like those orchestral, the orchestra pieces were sort of in the height channels, and it really gave it a beautiful sense of space and height. How did you approach that one?
Well, that's exactly right, because on the stereo, the orchestra's there, but they're really fighting with there's a lot of information, so you couldn't really hear it as big as I would have liked to have heard it. And so when I got a chance to mix it, I realized that what if I just put the orchestra up in the top in the height speakers and just had them live in that zone, and then kept all the power and all the emotion of the basic tracks down low. And it worked beautifully. The arrangement is so good. The arrangements were done by Michael Kamen, who's just an amazing musician who's no longer with us as well, but just the arrangements are so good. And to be able to hear them with all that power and really hear them, but at the same time not have it take away from the power of the song or the vocal, that was another one of those things that that's a good call. That, to me, that's one of my favorite songs in Atmos. It's one of my favorite Petty songs ever. But in Atmos, it really shines. And I remember when I made it, I kind of teared up. I mean, I'm not usually, I'm pretty cynical usually, but I kind of teared up when I listened to it. And I just said, man, I wish that guy was here. I wish Petty was here, because he would freaking love this. It's everything that an artist wants to do, is just find a better way to connect people to their music.
Let's talk about a few albums that he was here for, that you worked on. You've got kind of the run of Highway Companion into the Mudcrutch reunited album, Mojo and Hypnotic Eye. Take us through kind of the vibe of working with Tom and the band during that time when you were really involved.
Well, it was so fun because we really got to the point where we realized that so much of what made music special was getting a bunch of people in the same room and making it at the same time. And they were such a good band that they could do that. One of the things we did was we had just finished this film called Running Down a Dream. And it was a documentary. It was all about the whole story of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, starting with the first band, which was called Mudcrutch. And when we finished the documentary, Tom said, man, I'd love to get those guys back in to the studio. He goes, but I don't really want to go into a studio and have it all be, have it be kind of that pressure, because there was the two guys in the band, Tom Ledden and Randall Marsh, really hadn't been, Tom and Benmont and Mike had gone off and been in the Heartbreakers for 40 years, but these guys hadn't really played with them in a while. He says, Tom said, I just want to make it feel like we're just jamming. And is there a way you could record that? And we figured out a way using Pro Tools to record them in their rehearsal space. And you could run Pro Tools through a monitor board. So basically it just felt like they were rehearsing. We had a great monitor engineer, and we were able to record this thing and have them just play in the room with no headphones, but I was secretly recording it in another room. We made that Mudcrutch album that way, and it was so great because it was a live album, but we were able to record it and get really good quality out of it. When it came time to do the next album, which was a Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers album, Tom wanted it to do it the same way. So we did Mojo the same way. Mojo was an album that was pretty much a live in the studio album, and it was just such a wonderful way to work. We'd go in, they'd play it down a few times, and at some point it's like, well, should we listen back? And it's like, okay. And they'd walk into the control room and they'd hear what I'd been working on, which is kind of different than what it sounds like when you're just playing live. And they didn't have headphones on, so it was almost like, we had just played this live thing, and now we're going to hear what it sounds like if it was a record. And it was so fun because they'd hear it and immediately they'd go back and they'd go, okay, here's what we're doing. We're changing this on this one take. By the end of the day, we'd have like 2 or 3 songs done, and Petty was like, this is just like the most fun because we weren't slaving over anything. We were getting really good results. And I think that's when the band was really at a really high point creatively and just playing fantastically. It was a really wonderful time. That album, Mojo, and Hypnotic Eye, the album that followed it, were both made that way. I mean, we still did overdubs and we still did things that you do when you make a record, but it came together in such a beautiful and just seamless way. And, I just remember at the end of the day just going, hey, we came in here, what did we have? Nothing. What do we got now? We got 2 tracks. It's like, woo, So it was fun. It was just like driving on the PCH with the top down and the wind blowing through your hair. The speed the speed and the results were so good on those albums.
So in October of 2022, you do the Dolby Atmos mix for Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers' greatest hits. Obviously, so many gems on that, including Don't Come Around Here No More. Share a little bit about taking the multi-tracks and creating stems for your Atmos mix out of the assets that you have available. I'm sure, again, it's a bit of excavating and detective work.
It's 99% excavating and detective work, because sometimes you'll get the multi-tracks and they've been transferred. And a lot of the times you got to find them and bake them and transfer them yourself. And that was back in the day where some of these songs, that one you mentioned, Don't Come Around Here No More in particular, that was back when they had these things called masters and slaves, which is kind of a weird language, but basically what it meant was there would be one 24-track analog tape machine that would have 2-inch tape. You could record 24 tracks on it, but if you put time code on track 24, you could get another 24-track tape machine and sync it. So now instead of 24 tracks, you'd have 48 tracks. Well, minus 2, because you need 2 for time code. So 46 tracks. So what does that mean? It means that all those decisions that you could make and commit to and had to commit to, you could just not. You could just put a bunch of stuff on all those tracks and then decide at the very end what was going to be on the record or what wasn't. So in the case of Don't Come Around Here No More, I found that when we went to go and try and find the master tapes, there was a 24-track master, there was a 24-track slave, but there was also another 24-track slave and yet another 24-track slave. So all of a sudden you have all of these tracks, and what you do is you transfer them, you put them into Pro Tools, you lock them up, and then you got to figure out what did they use and what didn't they use. And it's not laid out that clearly. So you've got to be a detective. And that was such a fun track because it's one of his best tracks ever. And that was one of those things where it was just created. It was like a collage. It was created out of all these various pieces of things that were all over these various tracks that put together over 96 tracks. And then it was just like, okay, there's some girl going, woo, where is that? Where am I going to find that? And it took me days to figure that out. In the end, it's so much fun because in Dolby Atmos, when you have that many strange things going on, that's where you can really have these kind of things where, this girl's coming out of this speaker back there, and then all of a sudden this fretless bass shows up over there. And, it was really a lot of fun. But in order to do it properly, you really have to spend the time to listen to the master and find everything that's on those multi-tracks and match it as best you can. Because if you miss something, these are songs that people have lived with their whole life. Some of them, or a good portion of their life. And you have to respect the relationship that the audience has with these songs. And you can't shortchange that by doing things quickly or just rushing it. Because if you miss something, you're not paying the right amount of respect to the song or the audience or the artist. So that's what we try and do. And when it works, it's so cool and it's so fun. And so going through that album, The Greatest Hits, was a real revelation. And you realize some things about it, like Free Fallin' is another one of my favorite Atmos mixes. And it's kind of nerdy, but turns out that the Free Fallin' is basically bang, dang, 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 dang. That last chord is actually a suspended chord. Okay. Tom plays it as a suspended chord. Jeff Lynne plays it as a not suspended chord. So that last chord of that 4-chord sequence always has a little bit of a whoop, to it. And that's one of the magic things about that song. But you don't really realize it until you get into Atmos and you isolate these things. And you realize that there are these things that it sounds like one thing when you're listening to it in stereo. But in Atmos, you hear all the various components that come together to make that thing. And instead of having it come together in two speakers in front of you, it comes from all around you and it comes together in your brain. It's very satisfying.
It's almost like hearing something you love so much again for the first time.
Yeah. And you get to just see the things that went into it. And the effect is, it's not like it diminishes it when you can hear all these separate things. It enhances it because it still comes together as music. And it was a lot of fun. It was really a lot of fun just to see how these records were constructed and how they did them. And it's like I said, I'm lucky to be able to work on stuff like that.
And even outside of the studio, what a great live band they were indeed. I mean, one of the great live albums, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers live at the Fillmore in 1997. You mixed in Atmos in 2022. And this deluxe version has like 4+ hours of music picked from some of the final shows of that long run that they did at the Fillmore in 1997. I'm sure you did quite a bit of excavating and tape digging and picking through things to put that piece together, which it's 40+ songs or more over the course of that entire run. How was the process of going through that and listening back to such a great band play live and thinking about what you could do?
Well, it was really fun, and it was one of those things where spoilt for choice, I think is the word that comes to mind. One of the things that Tom always liked was he didn't want to put out live albums that are just the same thing over and over. He wanted to put out the best version he could of any given song. We worked for a year on this album called The Live Anthology came out in 2009. And I went over every live tape they'd done for like 30 years. And we put together this incredible set of, a song that starts, one cuts from 1978, the next cuts from 2004. And we just, and he sequenced it in a way where he didn't care where it was from. He just wanted to he made like kind of 4 little albums because it was a 4-disc set. And without really any sense of being constricted by what era. It wasn't chronological. So, and it came out great. When it came time to do the Fillmore, it was the same thing. We had a lot of different nights, but the rule was it had to be the best performance of any given song. So if there was 6 performances of It's Good to Be King, well, we had to find the best one. And sometimes it's, there's 2, 3 that are really, really good, and it was really hard to pick between them. But, we did, and we got something that really flows together. And I think it achieves the goal that Tom had. That's a 4-disc set. It's about 4 hours of music. And you can listen to it in one. If you want to sit down and just go from the beginning to the end, you can spend 4 hours and just have a great time. Or you can listen to it, and each disc itself kind of has its own arc to it. So I really tried to take everything that we'd learned from making the albums with Tom and just incorporate that into this Fillmore set. The other thing about Fillmore that's so fun is it shows you how much these guys loved music that wasn't necessarily theirs. They played all these songs from all these bands, and you see how deep the roots are for Tom and the Heartbreakers. They'd start jamming on a song during the afternoon for that night's show. And none of them had ever played it together before, but they all knew what the song was. So there was like this place where they all came together. Steve Ferroni knew the song, Howie Epstein knew the song, Ben Munt, Mike, Tom, Scott Thurston. And it was just so fun. I think they were having the time of their lives, and it kind of shows in that album.
Yeah, there's something like 35 cover songs on that album or something incredible. One song that is theirs, which was a hit of theirs, that I think is such a beautiful version on this. And I'm curious if they played it this way every night, but your Atmos mix of Won't Back Down, which is a sort of slow crowd sing-along version of it, where I think in Atmos, you really feel like you're there. Was that the version that they did kind of each night? And how did you approach mixing that one?
They kind of cruised into that acoustic version of I Won't Back Down. I think that was pretty much, I don't know at what point in the Fillmore they found it, but once they found it, they definitely repeated it. They knew it worked, and the thing about the Fillmore also is that it was about 20 nights they did there. And it turns out the same people would show up for repeat shows. So they had the same audience. So the audience got to know the songs better and better, and the sing-alongs got really good at the end because the audience knew exactly when it was their time. And, so that aspect of it is just so beautiful because it turned into kind of a communal musical experience, the Fillmore. It was just this thing. The audience was so good. And the Dolby Atmos gives you a sense of that place. It makes you feel like you're really in there with those people, having that ability to just feel the room was really special.
It's a really special record. It does make you feel like you're there for sure. So I can hear some Petty inspiration and a lot of other inspiration, certainly some other classic California rock bands and some British rock bands in your first solo album, Act 3, which was deservedly nominated for a Grammy for Best Immersive Audio Album. Congratulations on that nomination. But you wrote, you produced, of course, mixed and sang and played bass and keys on this record. And you got your live room right across the courtyard there. But tell us a bit about the background of putting that record together and going into it thinking about how to kind of create an immersive experience ultimately for the listener.
I had been writing these songs in the background for quite a long time and would always come up with ideas. I've been a composer really since I was like 13. So I decided at some point, and I actually had a chance to get a record deal at one point, and I had some meetings with A&M and various people. But it was right when my engineering career was taking off. And it was like, well, I could kind of struggle and be a struggling artist, or I could actually make money and be an engineer. So I kind of just was a little more practical about it and pushed that off to the side. And as my career went forward, I kept on working with these great people. So I kind of forgot about it. But at some point, it all came bubbling back to the point where I was just having dreams with complete songs in my head. And I'd wake up and I'd sing them into my phone. And I had a couple years of that, and I figured, okay, we had just finished the Fillmore thing. There was a little bit of time, and I decided I'm just going to take some of these ideas and bring some of my best friends in and make a record. And this is right when we had finished the Atmos room. I was really getting into Atmos, and the thought was, well, what if somebody made an album really with that sonic canvas in mind? In other words, what if somebody just made parts, thought about it, where you're doing this thing knowing what Atmos is capable of doing, and what if you made something from the conception like that? So I just went in and wrote these songs, made some demos, worked with some amazing musicians. There's a guitarist named Josh Hove, who is in a band called The Shelters, the band that Tom Petty Tom Petty produced along with Josh and his friend Chase Simpson, another person in the band, and I co-produced it as well. We made a couple albums. Well, we made one album in particular called The Shelters. And Josh is such a great guitarist. I just thought, God, if I ever do anything again, I'm going to bring him in. So I kind of demoed the songs out, got the structure right, played the keyboards, played bass, put some stand-in drums. And then just Josh came over and we just threw 5 million guitars at it and had so much fun because it was like I knew that if we came up with all these parts, there'd be a way for them to all work in Atmos. So we did that. And then at some point when they were ready, I brought in Steve Ferroni, who's one of the greatest drummers on the planet. And he listened to those and he listened to my little stand-in drums, and he said, "Okay, you can turn those off now." And he played drums over in this, and I have a big living room that has a really good sound to it. So I really wanted to get a lot of ambience because I just like that kind of big drum sound. And we added that. I added 1 million tracks of vocals. I spent a lot of time trying to write words that don't sound dumb. Just because I learned from Petty how important lyrics are. And I just took my time on it and mixed it in Dolby Atmos. Had a great mastering engineer named Michael Romanowski help me finish it. Gave him the mixes, and he tweaked it, and he did that little thing that magic thing they do in mastering. And we put it out on at first on this website called immersiveaudioalbum.com. And you put it out there, and you can actually download this file that you can play back if you have the right player. And it sounds amazing. And so it got put out on that site, and because of that, it would qualified for the Grammy to be nominated, and it got picked. And I think when I saw that, I practically fell over. Actually, I didn't fall over because I was in bed. It was early in the morning. But I think I closed my eyes and went, "Holy F," So it's a really fun thing. I loved it. I'm as soon as I get a little bit of chance, I'll go back and I'll do some more music like that. It's just so fun to be able to create with this huge, I guess I keep on saying, it's just a big sonic palette to paint on. And it's so fun. It's so rewarding. I had a friend over, I played a track for him today, he was a really younger guy, hadn't really heard it, heard the Atmos is kind of cool, but, it had headphones and didn't really, and he goes, "God, this is what it should be." It's like, yes, it is what it should be. And we're going to keep on pushing for it to get it into speakers. It's great in headphones, but it's really something when you can hear it on a good system. And the thing that I'm most encouraged about it is that the mixes that we're making today, you can listen to them on your headphones. You can stream them, but you can get some better equipment and actually some speakers in a couple years from now. And those mixes that we're doing today are going to sound really good then. So as a mixer, I like the fact that I'm making something that in a way is future-proof. And these Atmos mixes, if they're done right, will live on for a long time. And they'll only get better and better when you hear them on better systems.
We look forward to Act 4. And if there's anything else that you can share with us, I'm sure there's a lot of things you can't, but anything that we should be looking out for or stay tuned for in addition to Act 4, more music, more mixes, more immersive experiences, we're excited to do so. Yeah,
there's more in the pipeline, and I will let the people who who know far more than I just to tell people about it when it's time to come out. But believe me, there's a lot more, and there's some great stuff. I think that I really enjoy going back through the older stuff, through the Petty catalog especially. There's just so much magic in there, and I get to put on my little miner's hat and mine for buried treasure, as Tom would say. It's a really fun thing to do, and I'm really honored and lucky that they trust me to do it. And all I can say is that there's definitely a lot more joy in there to come out to the world, and that makes me feel good to do that.
Great, man. Well, you do it with intent and you do it with integrity. So well done, Ryan. Thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you, Ben.
Many thanks to Ryan for joining me for this great conversation and for being so gracious to have me into Ryan's place to hear some of his mixes. It's a truly special spot, and Ryan has taken the utmost care with his mixes to honor the legacy of his friend, the great Tom Petty. You can listen to Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers live at the Fillmore 1997, Tom Petty's Wildflowers and All the Rest, Angel Dream, which is music from the motion picture She's the One, Tom Petty's Mojo, and Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers' Greatest Hits, all mixed in Dolby Atmos by Ryan on enabled streaming music services. And be sure to check out his fantastic solo album, Act 3, which of course was nominated for Best Immersive Audio Album, also available on enabled services and at immersiveaudioalbum.com. You can learn more about Ryan and his Dolby Atmos studio, Ryan's Place, at his website, ulyate.com. To hear more conversations with mix and mastering engineers and producers working in Dolby Atmos, be sure you're subscribed to Dolby Creator Talks. You can find links to our show on all the major podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube in our show notes, where you can simply search for Dolby wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're curious to know more about Dolby Institute, head over to dolbyinstitute.com. There you'll find information about all of our programs. You can subscribe to our mailing list and access the entire library of episodes in this podcast. Dolby Institute is also where you'll find the Dolby Atmos Music Accelerator and Dolby Atmos Essentials course covering all the topics you need to get started creating content in Dolby Atmos today. For other amazing Dolby Atmos resources for music creatives, check out the links in our show notes. Everything is completely free and available in multiple languages. Until next time, this is Dolby Creator Talks. I'm Ben Givarz. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon. And our production coordinator is Karen Marroquin. Thanks for joining us.